Have you ever said to yourself, well, that was stupid, or I'm so fat, or I suck at this, or I should be doing more? Well, if so, you're not alone, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about our self-talk as in self-love. So we are on a 4-part series of self-love, and this is the second part. Last week we talked about, well, is self-love selfish, or is it really what we're called to do? And that was last week's episode. This week, we're talking about how we can love ourselves by our self-talk. And that's a biggie. The level of our success is determined by our self-talk and how we speak to ourselves. So that's super important. Another thing is, don't believe every thought we have. I mean, thoughts are thoughts, and they can be very different and diverse. And it's more about what thoughts we want to choose and train ourselves to believe. So first of all, the most important thing is just to start by understanding our brains. And where do these thoughts come from? Well, they can come from a lot of things. They can come from our past, our present, our stories, our beliefs, our identity. But it's important to understand that we have lots of parts of our brains all working together. But there's two main parts that it's important to know: the lawyer and the lifeguard. And so the lifeguard parts of us wants to keep us safe, and it wants to keep us in the little kiddie pool that has no water in it with a life jacket on, and still wants to keep us safe. So the lifeguard part of our brain is always telling us things like, oh, you can't do that. Oh, that's not a good idea. Oh, you could get hurt. Anything to keep us safe. But you just have to understand that's just a part of our brain, and that's doing its job. It's trying to keep us safe. And we don't have to believe what it's telling us. Then we have the lawyer part of our brain, which is very interesting because whatever we tell the lawyer, he just goes to work. He goes to work and he looks for evidence in our past. He looks for evidence in our present. So, for example, if I tell myself I'm not smart, he's like, yeah, I see that. Let's look at this example and look at this example and look at that example. And that's the lawyer's job. But I could also tell the lawyer either I am smart, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember how you did really well in this and you did really well in this, and he'll find evidence for that. So it's very interesting to know that we have a lawyer and a lifeguard part of our brain. We also have a mean girl. So the mean girl is just a judgmental bitch, and she just wants to criticize and compare and tell you all sorts of crap. So it's just important to understand that we have different parts of our brain, and if we just realize that, hey, that thought is actually coming from my lifeguard, and he's just trying to keep me safe, or she's just trying to keep me safe, and I appreciate you, but I'm going to choose not to listen to you. And lawyer, I'm going to tell you good thoughts and good choices, and then you can work on finding supportive evidence to just affirm what I want to tell you. And then mean girl, you just got to go away. So it's just important to know. I think one thing that's really helped me as far as like understanding my value and my self-worth and just how to look at myself was really receiving God's love and understanding how God loves us so unconditionally, and he sees all of our mess. He sees all of it, and he still really loves us. And I really find, because I talk a lot about how religion can make things a little bit challenging and be used in a not beneficial way. But again, I always look back at how did Jesus treat people? He was very kind to suffering people that were feeling, divorced women, and in that culture that was way more unheard of. He kind of crossed every cultural barrier as far as his choices and who he chose to love. And I just like looking at that example, and that's really huge because basically our self-confidence comes from how we talk about ourselves or talk to ourselves. Are we going to be loving? Are we going to be curious about our thoughts? Are we going to be gracious to ourselves? Or are we going to be a perfectionist and mean and have that mean girl come up, or the lifeguard just tell us how we can't do anything? And that is really what leads to self-confidence as far as like really being nice and talking to ourselves graciously and kindly, because that affects how we feel about ourselves. So our thoughts affect our feelings, and then our feelings affect our actions. So if we're feeling like more loving, then we're going to act in a more loving way towards others. So it's really neat how it all works out. We're also going to take care of ourselves and our whole selves and prioritize ourselves, which is super important part of loving ourselves too. So for my example, I really subscribed to the thought that I'm not enough. And so I just kept trying and trying more. And I really think it came from like a goodist mentality, or I wouldn't say a perfectionist necessarily, but like a real goodist kind of person, and wanting to do things the right way. But really that sort of belief system was so detrimental, because as I'm constantly thinking I'm not enough, I'm allowing myself to be mistreated in my previous marriage, I'm not advocating for myself, I'm working myself like harder and harder, having all these physical challenges. And so you can see how that negative thought pattern I had created a lot of actions that were not helpful to me or anyone else. Well, it may have been beneficial to my partner at the time, which it probably was, but it wasn't serving me as a whole. And if you're not a strong me, you're not going to have a strong we, not a healthy we. So that I had to really change that. And I really, again, I kind of go to God, because it's like we're all like uniquely individual, we're priceless masterpieces. He thinks we're all amazing. He thinks that we're all creative and smart. So I really look at how God thinks of us, and looked at the Bible, and it says that I'm more than enough. So I had to really get that ingrained in my brain. And once I was thinking, I am more than enough, God treasures me, then I was able to change my actions. And that, again, had different results. And that was a lot more beneficial to me. So that was really good. And again, a healthy me makes a healthy, I created a healthy family from that, as far as my kids are all doing a lot better. And a healthy second marriage, which is just a beautiful thing. And that took a lot of work to go from the point of where I was chronically believing I'm not enough and in a destructive situation, to retraining my brain to a point where I could have a really healthy relationship. That was just a lot of fun for me. So that's my example. But just to give an example, like even saying to ourselves, that was stupid. Something like that is not going to produce, that's not going to help us, because basically if we think, gosh, I'm so stupid, that was stupid, things like that, it kind of disempowers us and doesn't really allow us to be smart and learning from it. So I'm constantly correcting my thinking, and I'm constantly correcting my speech to just make it more aligned and loving. And it's a great way to practice changing that. So for example, that was stupid. I could say, well, that didn't produce the results that I wanted. And I learned this from it, and that is actually going to help me in my future. So that's the difference between that was stupid and yeah, that wasn't the best choice, and I'm going to choose to do things differently because I learned from that. So that's the difference between thoughts and how it can empower us. Have you gone through a breakup that's kind of left you rattled and maybe questioning yourself some? Do you find that you're a pretty kind person that's chronically overgiving, overfunctioning, and maybe you're just plain tired and maybe a little resentful? Do you feel like you're going through the motions of life, but you're not really living your life? Well, that's what the Unravel Notebook is for. It's 61 days for you to create your life by intent and unravel your thoughts and beliefs, so you can connect with God, yourself, and others in a better, more intentional way and live brighter. So how do we grow from all this? What are some action steps? If you find that your self-talk is negative, is like devaluing yourself, if you're comparing yourself a lot to others, I will tell you, you will never be the winner, or you will elevate yourself to a higher degree and be arrogant. So comparing ourselves doesn't do jack shit for us or anybody else. So I just say, as much as you can, just throw that sucker out the window. I also think judgment of others is the same thing. Just, like I've trained myself to, anytime I meet someone, I focus on something I like about them, or something that, because our brains naturally just want to be critical. And that's that just self-preservation part. The lifeguard is like, oh, you're just that preserving part. And I'm like, no, actually I'm going to choose differently. And if I'm going to make a judgment, it's going to be a good judgment. And I really like that. So let's take some action. What can we do? Because honestly, this is a growth thing for all of us. It's a lifelong thing because we're human, and there's a lot we can do by training our brains, but it takes intention and action. So these are some thoughts of some things you can do. So you can download your encouraging friend. And so what I mean by that is, like I said, you've got your lawyer, you've got your lifeguard in your brain, you got your mean girl. I just say download the encouraging friend. And sometimes I've like given her a name or a person I know that's always encouraging. And actually I've made that person Jesus because I see him as encouraging. And so don't do that if you have a idea that he's not that way. And I see him as loving and encouraging. And so I'm constantly like, okay, well, what is Jesus saying? Or what is he thinking? Or just being curious with my thoughts rather than that mean girl judgmental and, spewing out negative self-talk to myself. So downloading that encouraging friend and then just speaking kindly and encouraging to yourself. I know I had this idea that if I were to talk encouraging to myself, that's a little arrogant, but I'm like, that's so not true. I encourage myself all day long. And it's stuff like, wow, gold star, Tara, you really didn't want to make those calls that you needed to do for your real estate business, and you did it anyways. Or good job, Tara, you knew you had to follow up with a life coach client and you did it. So, or for me, just speaking truthfully when I just want to speak, there's times when I know I need to say something that's very, a little bit harsher and I need to say it. And just being able to say, gold star, Tara, you wanted to just let that slide by. It was a meeting and you didn't want to give your opinion, but you knew it was important and you did it. So just things like that, like constantly encouraging ourselves. And I think that's a great habit for us to get in. I think it really comes from this idea, who do you think we should be the nicest to in our lives? Or who are you the nicest to? And I think that's a very interesting thought, because if you look at a lot of people or a lot of families, it's not uncommon that they're actually nicer to strangers than they are to their own family, which is very strange. But then it's also very common that we're nicer to strangers and nicer to our family than we are to ourselves. And we're actually our closest person to us, and we should be the kindest there. That's where love should be starting. Love from God, loving ourselves, and then giving that love to others. And so it really makes sense that that's where it should start. So first of all, download the encouraging friend. You can just make that choice. Second, make the choice to boot out the mean girl. I just think getting rid of that comparison, that judging girl, that just mean girl, just get rid of her. And just say, you don't belong here anymore. This is not your home. And then third, whenever you're thinking a thought that is not great self-talk, ask yourself a couple questions. Is it true? There's a lot of times I used to say, gosh, I suck at writing. Well, that sure didn't empower me to write. And so it's well, I'm not, I do make mistakes in writing, but it's not true that I suck at writing. And so the first question is it true? The second question is it serving me to think on this? And I really think that comes from a really great verse that I love in Philippians. Think about whatever is true, whatever is noble, what is right, what is pure, lovely, admirable. Dwell on those things. And so if we're thinking things that are not uplifting to ourselves, that really are self-sabotaging, that don't serve us, then that's why we're to be that's not the thoughts we're supposed to be taking, and that's not going to serve us. So I think it's a great idea to also evaluate your I am statements. If you think, gosh, I am not fit, or I'm fat, or any I am statement, just really start evaluating. Gosh, is that true? Everyone would agree. Is that serving me? And evaluating that. So, and then you just choose to train yourself over and over. So that's the fourth thing. So download the encouraging self, boot out the mean girl, ask yourself some questions. Is it true? Is it serving you? Fourth, choose to train your brain over and over. And for me, when I was training myself with I am more than enough, I'd have it on my phone, I'd listen to recording, I would have it on my mirror, and I just had to retrain my brain because I had made such a neural pathway that it was just chronically dumping into that area. So I had to really train my brain. So the fifth one is the tool that I made, which is the Unravel Notebook. And that is a series of promptings of writing and also the BARF notebook process, which basically helps you barf it out, plan it out, and kind of sort it out. But then it has a lot of those journal prompts, for lack of a better term, that really help us to reconnect to God, ourselves, and others. And that helps us still be that kind girl, but not the kind girl with the bullseye that attracts these unhealthy relationships. And then the sixth thing I would recommend that I've just have found really helpful is hypnotherapy. So I'm a life coach and a hypnotherapist. And I have to say that when I hear the term hypnotherapy, I think of like the fair and people acting like chickens. That's so not what hypnotherapy is. It's basically a sweep of the conscious mind to go into the unconscious and the subconscious mind to rewire it. And that has been a super helpful process to me, because what I found in life coaching is on a conscious level, I could do so much, but there were these subconscious and beliefs that were chronically popping up. And so this is just a process that I can do like on Zoom, super easy. It takes about a good hour and a half, but we just go and figure out how that belief once served you in your past. And then we give that part a new role that actually is serving you now. And that's a really great way to rewire our brains. And so, for example, I had a client that had a chewing habit. And when we did hypnotherapy with him, I found out that he had adopted a belief when he was younger that said, I am weak and out of control. And that was actually a great belief back then because it kept him safe. He was in some situations that belief was actually kept him safe. But now that part wasn't serving him because it wanted him to, feel in control and chew, which is kind of counterproductive, but that's how our brain works sometimes. And so we were able to change that belief to something that served him, which is I am strong and in control. And that was helpful, and now he doesn't chew. And so it's really great to figure out like the tools that you think would work best for you and decide how you want to pursue loving yourself more. Because the more you love yourself, the more you can love others and just live a brighter life and let your light shine. And that's what you're made for, is to let your light shine, because all of us have beautiful lights and we all have something to add to the world. I like the example. I'm going to leave you with this example of Tony Robbins. I love Tony Robbins. He was just a poor kid at 17, living in his car, just a very challenging childhood. And now we can, for the ones that know Tony Robbins from his impact, he's one of the most impactful self-help people that we know. And, if you listen to his story, that started by changing his thoughts, his self-talk, one thought at a time. So let your light shine. I believe in you. Have a great day.